This is Chris Collinsworth. Be sure to check out the PFF College podcast as our experts provide insight on all the league's top stories. Every game, every player, every play. Download and subscribe on iTunes or your favorite provider.
Hello and welcome back to the PFF podcast. The conference championships are over, the Super Bowl is set, the 2016 NFL season is nearly in the books, and we've got just enough time to give a quick review podcast because Mike Renner is on his merry way to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. Isn't that right, Mike?
I'm not on my way. I am actually in Mobile, Alabama as we speak. I had a fun day of traveling down here, but yeah, I'm actually in Mobile getting ready for tomorrow's weigh-ins that we're sponsoring.
Nice. There you go. PFF sponsoring the weigh-ins.
Oh yeah, plug it.
At the Senior Bowl with a giant PFF contingent down there, of which Mike is part of it.
Yeah, how'd you not make the cut, Sam? We got like 15 guys down here.
I know. I think part of it is because at the moment they just won't let me in the country in any way, shape, or form. So once we're over that hurdle, we can start going to the fun things again. But let's take a look back at the week that was, or the weekend that was, and the conference championships, which on paper looked fantastic. We were talking the preview podcast last week about how both these looked like close games. We weren't that confident in how things were going to pan out, except that they should be two good games. And in the end, neither one was particularly close. I mean, the Falcons just pretty much stomped on the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Championship game. And it took the Patriots a little bit longer, I guess, but they did a pretty similar job on the Steelers.
Oh my! I was so excited for Sunday's games. I thought they were going to be two, hotly contested, down to the wire type of games. I just thought the teams were very evenly matched, and boy, was I wrong. I mean, those were snooze fests. I think by the fourth quarter, I had a hard time even paying attention to either. If I wasn't working that Steelers Pats game, I might have gone to bed early because I had an early flight. So it really was not. Were not good football games and not entertaining in the slightest. If you weren't a fan of either team that won.
It's what's kind of intriguing about football as a sport to me, though, in that these were two games that weren't even close to the closely fought affairs we thought they were going to be. But I don't know that means the two teams weren't closely matched overall. I think football, more than any other sport, is really high variance in terms of the results you would get if you played the same game 10 times over. If you think of another sport like soccer maybe, or basketball or whatever, if you played the same game 10 times, you'd get more or less the same kind of game. The result at the end might be slightly different, but it would go down kind of similar. I can imagine both of these games actually going down in completely different ways if they were forced to play it all again next Sunday. Am I wrong on that?
No. I definitely think you're right. There were some very easy things to point to that would say that things could have gone differently. One, obviously Le'Veon Bell going out of the game. We talked about him ad nauseum through the past 3 to 4 weeks about how he is that offense at this point. And when you basically lose a guy like him, it's akin to a lot of teams losing their starting quarterback. You just can't replace everything he did and what they probably game planned going into the game, what their plan of attack was. So that was huge. Him going down early just changed the whole tide of the game. If he plays, it's maybe a different story. They still had their struggles defensively, but they could have at least moved the ball offensively. And then the first game, we saw the Packers just not capitalize on any opportunities. I think there were 3 or so fumbles in that game, all recovered by the Falcons. They dropped a couple of picks off of Matt Ryan. So just if that sort of turns around earlier in the game, it's a little closer. A couple breaks go the Packers' way, it could have been closer. But on Sunday, I think both of the better teams ended up winning. And I think if we did play those games, like you said, 10 times, both the Falcons and the Pats probably win about 7 or 8 at least.
My favorite part about that game is that we were talking all the way in the preview podcast about this was going to be a 30-point shootout. Both sides were going to be over 30. The only thing guaranteed about this game was bet the over. And at 24-0 at halftime, that was looking like it's the worst call we have ever made over the course of this podcast.
Oh, I don't know. I still felt fairly confident.
Which features some pretty terrible calls. And yet, then it happened. The two of them ended up combining for the over anyway, albeit 44 of those points on one side with the Falcons. But what was really interesting about this game is from that very first drive, Atlanta just came off on the right side of everything that happened. I think they were forced to go to the third down well 3 times on the opening drive and ended up coming away with a touchdown. And I think a couple of those were third and long, 3rd and 8, third and significant yardage. And they converted every single one of them, ended up putting the ball in the end zone for a touchdown. And that was kind of the story of this entire game, that whatever was going on with the Green Bay offense, which was definitely having its more struggles than we, I think, expected it to, it didn't matter because the defense was just not able to stop the Falcons at any point in the game.
No, I think what Matt Ryan has done throughout this whole year that's kind of gotten thrown under the radar to some degree, and why people still argue about if he's MVP or not, is he makes it look easy because he finds his most favorable matchup, it seems like, play after play after play. He finds the guy that's wide open play after play after play. And against the Green Bay defense, we've seen that they turn guys wide open play after play after play. So it was just a perfect storm of competency with the Falcons and incompetency with the Green Bay Packers. I mean, their plan for Julio Jones was it just didn't work. No matter they would put safety over the top on Ladarius Gunter, but it didn't matter if Ladarius Gunter was giving up 5 to 10 yards of separation on underneath routes. There really was no. They just didn't have the talent on any spot in that defense to keep up with them.
I mean, the safety over the top thing only works if you're actually going to use him to kind of bracket the guy and not just have him vaguely, supervising the ineptitude in front of him, which is basically what was happening. You had one safety essentially having a front row seat to Ladarius Gunter getting whooped for the entire game by Julio Jones. I mean, that's not a constructive use of your safety over the top.
Well, they basically said it on the podcast, on the actual I think Troy Aikman said it. He said, Ladarius Gunter runs a 4.7 140. That's what he ran at the combine. Julio Jones ran in the 4.3s. If you're giving up 0.4 of a second of separation in 40 yards, that means you just cannot keep up with the guy deep. And so I think that's what the Packers were basically banking on, that the fact that maybe he can keep up on some, in breaking routes, out breaking routes, the underneath stuff, but we'll just keep him in trail technique and make sure if he is going to go deep, Julio is going to run post, is going to run a 9 route, that the safety's there. What they didn't account for was that, Julio Jones is actually much quicker underneath as well. So whatever they tried, it didn't work.
And that's the problem, is that he just couldn't keep up anywhere. You have to feel sorry for him, really, because there were some plays where he ran clean off the screen, and one replay of was an out route by Julio Jones where he sold in the post and then just broke outside as soon as Gunter looked back to the quarterback. It was horrific. But after that play, I think Gunter basically just resorted to tackling him. Like, he just was trying to grab him.
But he didn't, though, on the play where you actually legitimately should have tackled him with 9 seconds left to go at the end of the first half. You should, in that situation at the goal line, you should be doing nothing but tackling the guy. You should never, ever allow a guy free release off the line of scrimmage in that situation, because the holding penalty does nothing for the offense. Yeah. Like we saw with the Saints earlier this year, the 49ers did that against the Saints. It was beyond belief that they would allow a touchdown in that situation.
I think at that point it's because he was just getting abused even when he tried to hold him. I mean, his problem was not just that Julio Jones is faster than him in a straight line, is quicker than him in short areas. He's stronger than him as well. So there were these plays where Julio Jones or Gunter was trying to jam him on the line, and by jam I mean basically tackle him and grab and manhandle him and do anything except let him run past him. And Julio Jones would win that wrestling match and just toss him aside and go anyway. I mean, the ridiculous touchdown run that he had was started off with Gunter basically trying to tackle him off the line. And Julio Jones essentially ends up tossing him aside, making the catch anyway, then running past him, and then, stiff-arming Demarius Randall twice on the way down the sideline to score the touchdown anyway. I mean, it's not just that there was one area where Gunter couldn't deal with him. It was just across the board, which is the great problem with Julio Jones, is that he is like Randy Moss used to be, bigger, faster, taller, longer, everything. He beats you in every possible category.
Yeah, there's no real scheming around guy losing every time. Like, if you can't actually have one guy stay within a good amount of yardage to him, you can only do a pure double team so often without completely sacrificing the rest of the defense. So it really just they had no answer with the talent they have in the secondary. There was no answer. Their best answer was to score 44 against them, and they just got down so much early that you just can't pass 75 or however many percent of their snaps that they did and expect to run a successful offense in the NFL. Opposing defensive lines, I don't care how good you are in pass protection, are going to start getting pressure on you. You just can't sustain drives passing that often.
Yeah, and they had a couple of things going against them, the Packers offense. The first is that they were dropping passes again. Jordy Nelson, I think deserves a lot of credit for going out there probably on all of the painkillers to strap up those broken ribs with the
I don't think you're supposed to actually take more than one. It's like more than one different type.
The recommended dosage.
I mean, you can take more of the dosage, but if you're like mixing types, I think you get in trouble that way. But I don't know. We're not doctors at PFF.
Like in trouble from it's not good for you, or in trouble as someone's going to come rap on your door.
Like you start to hallucinate in trouble. But
I don't think that matters, to be honest. I think if it's a choice between taking the shot to the ribs on your broken ribs and potentially seeing some pink elephants, you're going to go with the elephants. But maybe that does explain why he dropped the pass in the course of the game, because who knows what he was seeing come towards him when the pass arrived. But
what was Jared Cook's excuse then?
Well, I don't think Jared Cook needs an excuse. That's just the Jared Cook we know and love.
Very fair.
Who doesn't typically come up with the giant clutch catch when they need him to most, as he did the week before. But I think Nelson deserves a lot of credit for going out there and playing relatively well, given, we were talking before the game that we didn't expect him to be a big factor, because even if he was out there, it wasn't going to be anything like 100% Jordy Nelson. But he looked okay, except for the
I was going to say, yeah, when he was actually running the routes, when he was actually off the line of scrimmage doing that stuff, he looked fine. I couldn't have discerned between healthy Jordy Nelson and broken ribs Jordy Nelson. But as soon as it seemed like the play ended, he reminded everyone he was like holding his ribs, wincing in pain as he's hobbling to the sidelines. Everything looks like it turned. He all of a sudden the dosage started wearing off in between plays. It seemed like.
It certainly looked that the longer that game went, the more pain he was in, which I guess makes sense if you're dosed up to the eyeballs to begin it. But the other thing from that offense, so they dropped some passes that were a problem when you're that far down and basically need to be as efficient as humanly possible. But they also allowed way more pressure than most games, I think. I haven't actually looked game by game, but their offensive line allowed quite a lot of pressure. David Bakhtiari has been ridiculously good this season, the best pass protector in the NFL. Didn't allow a sack, but he allowed 6 total pressures in this game. And I think every member of the offensive line, with the exception of TJ Lang, who played only 38 snaps before going off injured, and actually Don Barkley as well, who came in after the injuries getting reshuffled, allowed multiple pressures, some form of pressure before it. And that just doesn't happen with Rodgers. We've talked about him being, this behind the best pass protecting line in the NFL, but he was under pressure for 20 snaps out of 49. That's a lot.
Well, I think that goes back to my original point of their run-pass split was 52 called pass plays versus 16 called runs, which the whole second half, the Atlanta Falcons said, we don't give a damn about the run. We are firing up the field on every play. And at that point, you're in the absolute hardest position. A lot of the times they were going 5 wide too and keeping no one in to pass protect. Going to scat pass protection with the defense knowing that they're going to be a pass play. And that's the absolute hardest position for an offensive line to be. And I mean, and it was still irregular for guys like David Bakhtiari to give up that many pressures because he's been in situations like that before and still held up. But yeah, I mean, I can't fault them too much. They really hung themselves out to dry with the play calling. They're getting that far behind.
That, I think, was double the pressure that David Bakhtiari has given up in any other game this season. I think the most he's given up so far this year is 3 total pressures in a game, and that was 6 in this game. It's also the only time this season he's allowed his quarterback to hit the ground multiple times. So they definitely hung themselves out to dry a little bit in terms of the play calling, but they struggled more than you would expect them to, even sort of considering being asked to do essentially ridiculous things in terms of the play calling and that kind of thing. The other thing that was interesting is they suffered a whole load of injuries over the course of that game, multiple guys going down, to the point where they finished the game with their nose tackle, LaTroy Guion, playing right guard for the final 5 snaps from a 3-point stance because he's a nose tackle trying to play guard, instantly becoming one of Ben Stockwell's favorite players in the NFL.
It's a crime that they didn't let him try to pass protect a little bit and, see if he's better than TJ Clemmings, basically, is what we all want him to know. But it's actually funny that he did it against the Falcons, because it was the Falcons a couple years back that had Levine Toilolo end a game playing right tackle, and he played right tackle for like a full quarter, and they actually were close and had to pass in that game. And they basically just were keeping everyone in to help them, basically doing my 6-man line idea and keeping everyone in to pass protect. But would have been fun to see that be actually a close game with LaTroy Guion, and they're needing, one score to win it. See what they would have done with him.
Well, the Falcons themselves have a bit of a two-way player in Ben Garland. Ben Garland came in, played 7 snaps at center in this game because Alex Mack was banged up. But we're not far away from Ben Garland getting himself a safety, playing a bit of defensive line. So, also, Ben Garland didn't just get on the field. He had a couple of dominant, crushing blocks late in this game where the Packers' defense was just out on its feet. I mean, those last couple of drives, that Atlanta offensive line just destroyed them. That was more legitimate pancake blocks in those couple of drives than I've seen in any single game, I think, that I can remember this season.
Yeah, giving up at the end is it happens. It's hard to blame a guy for fighting, for however many snaps they did out there, 80 or so, almost 80 snaps, and just not having it when the game's over.
What about the other game then, the Patriots against the Steelers? This was a game where it actually was close for quite a lot of it, and then it just started to slip away from Pittsburgh, and just once it started to roll away from them, it just kept going and snowballed.
Well, they did a good job of taking away Antonio Brown to some degree. You knew they were going to game plan. It's like everyone and their mother knew that there was going to be a game plan to stop or somewhat shut down Antonio Brown. And basically what came back to haunt them was their other receivers' incompetence that we saw all year. We were kind of questioning who's going to emerge as another target, who's going to emerge as another playmaker, now that they've lost Martavis Bryant for the year. And no one ever did. And Sammy Coates dropped 3 balls in that game. They dropped 119 yards worth of passes. I mean, you can't drop that many you can't drop that many balls and expect to sustain a drive and make a comeback attempt. And it was a futile attempt, especially after, obviously, what I talked about earlier, Le'Veon Bell going out for the game.
Yeah, that was big. DeAngelo Williams is a fun player. He's obviously not Le'Veon Bell, but I thought he played okay given the kind of situation around him. It really was, like you were saying, between Sammy Coates and who's the other receiver that was dropping passes in that game?
Hamilton.
Yes, Kobe Hamilton. Between the two of those guys, they were just absolutely destroying the Pittsburgh offense. Sammy Coates had a few horrible ones. They also then elected to throw a fade route in the end zone to Kobe Hamilton, who couldn't do a thing right in that game. On
a crucial 4th down.
Yeah, a do or die.
On basically the end of the game when they dropped it. When it fell to the ground. That was
literally like a do or die 4th down. You decide to throw an end zone fade to a guy who couldn't do anything right in this game. That didn't seem like a winning strategy. Also, how crucial did was it challenge or was it just review? Jesse James coming down just short of the end zone, and then Pittsburgh conspiring to walk their way back away from the goal line and end up not getting the score.
Yeah, it was overturned. It was initially ruled a touchdown, and that was huge because I mean, it looked like at that point it was a back and forth game. I think that would have brought it within 3. At that point, it was in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden it's not within 3. They're down touchdown, and it just the back and forth type of momentum of that game just stopped. The offense stopped in its tracks as well, and it was basically all Patriots from that point on.
The other story out of this game is the defense, Pittsburgh's defense. I wrote an article before the game about the kind of weird techniques that Steelers defense uses at times, and how you can kind of get a lot of the underneath coverage out of your way by some of the route combinations you use and target the space in behind them that they run away from. And they definitely did that at some point during the game, got some decent sized plays out of it, but that wasn't nearly as big a problem as just outright coverage bust, with guys being completely uncovered multiple times over the course of the game. It was like they had never seen this New England offense before. They were completely unprepared and wide open receivers.
Yes, to have as many coverage busts as they did, or just gaping holes in coverage for as many times as they dropped 8 into coverage, was amazing to me. It was so undisciplined with their eyes. The first touchdown to Hogan was just the safety, just, not even, staring down Tom Brady and watching him roll outside the pocket and drifting with them away from a zone and leaving, Hogan wide open. So just a lot of just undisciplined play from that secondary and from the linebackers. And like I just said before, they rushed 3 play after play after play over 50% of the time in the first half. They moved away from it a little more in the second half because they realized we were just getting burned by it. But I don't understand the strategy to have James Harrison dropping into coverage. I just, when you have a guy like James Harrison, he should be rushing the passer every single down. He dropped into coverage 18 snaps in this one. 18 snaps he dropped into coverage. I don't want him playing coverage. You don't have that great of pass rushers to begin with. Why is he not attacking Tom Brady every time? Because he wants to put Tom Brady on the ground.
Yeah, and Bud Dupree dropped into coverage 20 times. So, they're 2 starting.
I'm a little more okay with him dropping into coverage.
Well, but I mean, in terms of athleticism, but again, it's the same story. Those are the 2 guys, if you're going to get pressure, it's going to come from those 2. And you're dropping them into coverage a combined 38 times over the course of the game. I mean, that's putting your players in a position that they're not going to succeed in. The other interesting thing I thought is we talked up this Steelers offensive line heading into this game and saying that they were probably the best offensive line in the NFL on current form, but they got handled in the run game by that New England defensive front, who just absolutely manned up and really took it to them.
No, that probably was the somewhat game-changing match. I wonder if it would have been different had we seen Le'Veon Bell a little, just because of how much that's a, harmonious relationship between the 2. Guys have to stay on their blocks longer with Le'Veon Bell back there. If we would have seen him more, if things would have turned out a little bit differently. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. Rewatching the tape, they got absolutely manhandled against a front that, the New England Patriots front has been good against the run all year. We've said that the shortcoming is the fact that they can't actually get much pressure, and they really didn't in this one. I think Big Ben was only under pressure 6 to 8 times, but it didn't really matter because, you shut down the run enough that you force them to be one-dimensional like they were in the second half, and that's when you have them right where you want them. So I think that was probably where the New England Patriots ended up, winning this game defensively, was right along that front, manhandling an offensive line that I thought was going to have success.
Alan Branch in particular was going one-on-one a lot with Maurkice Pouncey and just was 2-gapping against him. He was standing him straight up and he just stuffed him into the line of scrimmage, waited until the run came his way and played the gap either side of him and just moved him aside and made the play, or at least blocked the running lane. It's really interesting for 2 reasons, I think. One, it's going to be curious to see if he can do that against Alex Mack in the Super Bowl, because Mack, I think, has been a much better player than Pouncey this season. I think has more physical power and run blocking ability about him than Pouncey does. And it'll be kind of interesting to see if Branch can do the same trick against a better caliber of player in the next game. But the other thing is, as you say, it would have been really fascinating to see if Le'Veon Bell would have been able to succeed against that, because he has this incredible ability to set up blocks where he will come up to the line, he'll give you that stutter step, and then he'll show you one side of that two gap. And then as soon as you duck that side, he'll go the other side and shoot into the gap that you just abandoned. So, Pouncey didn't really generate any movement, but I wonder how much of that is because he's used to Le'Veon Bell essentially making his own blocking by setting up the defender.
No, that's a very good point. And you mentioned Alan Branch, though. I wanted to touch on him for a second. A lot of people want to point to Kyle Van Noy and Shane McClellan as these examples, and Barkevius Mingo as these reclamation projects that, they go to the Patriots and they're going to be good. Those guys really weren't that good this year. Alan Branch is a guy who was really not that great with Buffalo early in his career. He was really, he was a highly touted coming out of Michigan way back when. I think it was a second-round pick, but he really was never a dominant nose tackle. He has, in New England the past couple of years, evolved into a dominant nose tackle when there really was nothing to show that he would have been that. And I think he's probably the best example of a guy who, is a New England reclamation project that actually is impressive, as opposed to two guys who were never very good and still aren't doing that well for the Patriots.
Alan Branch is a really interesting player because he is this guy that was really a disaster for the first few years of his career. It wasn't just a second-round pick. He was the 33rd overall selection. So he was one of those very sharp end of the second-round picks, a guy that's, for all intents and purposes, a first-round guy, crapped out of Arizona, having never really shown anything at all. But he was a guy who, at 6'5", 330 pounds, he's one of these guys that gets typecast immediately as a nose tackle, but always struck me as a guy that was actually more of a sort of three-tech trapped in a nose tackle's body. But when you look at him now, you're talking about, I don't know what this is, like his 10th season in the league, maybe 11th. At this point, I don't think that's true anymore. I think he's evolved into this sort of latter stage of his career, run-stuffing defensive tackle, the way that he couldn't be earlier in his career, the way that he wasn't, I don't think, naturally early in his career. And yeah, like you say, this is, I think, by far the best season of his career, definitely the best run defending season of his career. The guy has 38 defensive stops this year, which is 10 more than any other season in his career. And it's also the most playing time he's had in any year of his career. He's been playing 61.2% of the New England defensive snaps. He's topped 700 snaps for the first time in his career. That is, I think, a great example of a New England reclamation project. And what's really interesting about those is that they can come at any position. I mean, if you look at that history of the Belichick, those rosters, they've been able to find guys, cast off guys at more or less any position. I guess part of it is because they try at every position. So you get these guys like, Van Noy, McClellan, all those kind of guys. The
Patrick Chung.
Yeah, the roster's still full of them. But I guess the upside of that is that you do see them succeed at a load of different positions. Guys like Corey Dillon and, even like Randy Moss was a guy that the Raiders
he really was.
Just wanted to get rid of.
Yeah.
So that's probably going to do it for our shortened championship weekend review podcast, except to say that Mike and Steve are going to be back later this week in place of our preview podcast. The two guys in situ in Mobile, Alabama are going to give you a more thorough rundown of the Senior Bowl and what they've seen over the first couple of days, who to watch out for the remaining days there, and who to keep an eye on during the game itself, which is played on Saturday?
Oh, God, don't ask me. I don't know. Saturday. Maybe?
Later this week, at the weekend.
Later this week.
But for all those who don't know, Mike, we're getting into the NFL offseason now. We've just got the Super Bowl to go. But this is the NFL. There is no offseason. As soon as the season finishes, we're into draft prep and we're into free agency. So what is the Senior Bowl for anyone that isn't familiar?
Senior Bowl is basically a week-long showcase for seniors. The game is probably the least important thing of the entire week. There's weigh-ins, there's interviews, there are multiple days of practices, and the practices are most important because you have guys coming. A lot of the guys you're showcasing, under the radar guys or guys who played at smaller schools, or a lot of them who basically didn't get to play against top competition this past year or any year in their college career. And so now they're going up against the best of the best, and they get to practice for a whole week. They go through a ton of one-on-ones, a ton of, competitive drills during the week to basically show how good they actually are, when it's sometimes difficult to see, how good Western Kentucky's left tackle is against, some crappy teams that he's facing all season long. So you see a lot of guys move up and down draft boards after this for actual good reason, because this actually matters, and you see guys every year shine at this game and go on and have success in the NFL. So that's the long and short of the Senior Bowl, and it's exciting. It's a fun time.
And you don't have to go far to find a Senior Bowl success story. In that last season, Dak Prescott was at the Senior Bowl. So you get a chance this is a guy that not many people were coming out of the Senior Bowl saying this is now a first-round pick or anything. But the point is...
Well, and Carson Wentz. So
yes, the point is you get a look at these guys who, for whatever people thought of them at draft time, are going to be NFL stars at some point. But who are a couple of guys that you're really intrigued to look at over the course of this week?
So, like I just mentioned, the Western Kentucky left tackle that I was kind of referring to is Forrest Lamp, who's been fantastic in our grading system. Only allowed 4 total pressures all season long, didn't allow a sack at all. But again, he played at Western Kentucky, and a lot of people already have him pegged as a guard or a center at the next level, one of those popular, small school tackles who profiles as an interior lineman in the NFL. But I want to see him, take some snaps of the one-on-ones at left tackle, see what he can do. Maybe he'll probably take some inside as well, but I just want to see if he holds up, against those top competition. And then another guy I love the O-line, D-line one-on-ones. Those are my favorite to watch. So I'll mention Jordan Willis, our most productive edge rusher this year. He had more higher pass rushing grade than any other defensive end in college football, but he beat up on some terrible, terrible right tackles in the Big 12. He goes to Kansas State, or went to Kansas State, but beat up on terrible right tackles in the Big 12. Had some monster grades, but a lot of that due to, level of competition. So when he comes here, faces some legit tackles, is he going to be able to produce as well? Because he looks a little awkward. He's not a traditional explosive, bend the edge type of guy. He looks a little top heavy, has some balance issues, but if he's still productive, that's still something to look out for. So those two guys I'm going to be keeping a close eye on.
I really like this week for that strength of competition thing that you talked about, because it's it's an all-star game. So you get these guys that, like you say, may not have ever faced legitimate competition in college. They may be small school guys, they may be small conference guys who have been monstrous, but against a series of guys they're never going to be playing in the NFL. And suddenly you get to see them hang for a week against legitimate NFL prospects. And the single most intriguing guy on either roster to me is Eastern Washington wide receiver Cooper Kupp, who has put up some absolutely ridiculous numbers for Eastern Washington. Also, his quarterback who transferred to Oregon, whose name I'm going to remember in a
Vernon Adams.
There you go. Vernon Adams.
How could you forget?
I know. Yeah. The best quarterback in the draft, according to some.
Yeah.
Some, yes. He said about Cooper Kupp that he is the best wide receiver in the entire nation a year ago. And, again, the question with him is that he's only been at Eastern Washington. And I think we're going to end up grading Cooper Kupp's season this year at PFF. We tend to only grade the FBS, not the FCS. We made an exception last year, and we went back and looked at all of Carson Wentz's season because we knew that he would be this top 5 guy. I think we'll end up having a look at Cooper Kupp's season just because his grades in the games we have against FBS teams over the past 3 years are ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the grading that's ridiculous, but the numbers are ridiculous. His game against Oregon in 2015, I think, was possibly the single greatest performance from a wide receiver I have ever seen. But in 3 games...
That was high praise.
I'm serious. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Even at the time of doing that game, it was Like every single time he caught the ball, it was and I'm gone for a touchdown. But in 3 games that we have, he's ranked up 35 catches in 3 games, so that's pretty impressive right away. Almost 600 yards, 597 yards in 3 games, for 9 touchdowns. It's just, I mean, those are like, he's averaging 3 touchdowns and 200 yards a game against FBS competition every time he plays them. So every time he steps up a level in competition, he racks up 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. And when you look at his FCS numbers, they're like the same. I mean, he's set, I think, a whole bunch of all-time NCAA receiving records, and he's got sort of the size and the speed. He's 6'2", 215. He's played inside and outside. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch him for a week of practice against some guys that are definitely a step up of what he's gone up against.
I will add one more note, and this applies to Kupp as well, but as much as this is a showcase, it can drop your stock down considerably. I don't think that's going to happen with Kupp, but we've seen it in the past. If you come here and you get owned, and you just don't look good, you will drop. And I think the most notable example of that is a friend of the show, TJ Clemmings, who was oft thought of as potential first-round pick back in 2015 because he dominated at right tackle for Pittsburgh, was our highest graded tackle in college that year. But he came to the Senior Bowl and got his butt whooped in pass protection drills. Did not look like he knew what he was doing. Not much has changed, I'll say, but he dropped to the 4th round. And now he's TJ Clemmings. So yeah, that's it's there's good and a bad to it, but I think coaches always give some deference to guys who come out here and compete. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that some guys avoid it. You've got Deshaun Watson not going this year. The Clemson quarterback is supposed to be one of the top.
And yeah, a lot of times the top 5 to top 10 guys will just avoid it at all costs because at that point there's nothing more to gain.
And I think especially at quarterback, where essentially, unfamiliar offense, unfamiliar receivers, you can almost only look bad. Everyone already you're a presumptive top pick, which is why you're being talked about and looked at the top of the draft. So it's very difficult to actually do yourself any favors by going to the Senior Bowl if you're one of the really top guys. One of the other guys that got his ass handed to him at the Senior Bowl, though, who has turned it around, is Shaq Mason, as we've been talking about, the New England Patriots guard, who was one of the first season we did college at BFF, was one of my personal favorite players because he came out of that triple option system in Georgia Tech where he would fire off the ball every single snap from a 4-point stance, just launch himself at the opposing defender's knees, regardless of who he was, whether he was the nose tackle, the linebacker, the safety, everyone's knees were just in his path. He was going for them. But obviously, those guys basically don't pass ever, so he had no clue whatsoever how to pass protect. And he came to the Senior Bowl, got absolutely destroyed, both in practice and in the game. And the Patriots ended up drafting him, and he has now learned how to pass block. And over the second half of the season, Shaq Mason, I think, has been our number 1 ranked right guard. So you can, as long as you understand... You're
saying there's some hope for TJ Clemmings? Is that the
takeaway?
TJ
Clemmings is screwed. But I am saying that if a guy struggles, as long as you can identify what the problem is, it's not necessarily a death knell to the guy's career.
No, I agree.
Well, assuming the problem is fixable, as opposed to just the problem being he's terrible, which I think is TJ's failing, sadly.
Oh, we got to stop with that. He's going to come kill us.
He'd miss. Like, he'd just lunge and fall over face first in the dirt. I think we're fine. But that's going to do it for us. Mike and Steve will be back later in the week. I'm just going to chill. I'm going to go to the beach, maybe.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. And then me, Mike, and Tuck will be back the following week to preview the Super Bowl, which I hear is a pretty big game these days. Hope you've enjoyed listening to our championship review podcast and a little bit of Senior Bowl prep. That's going to do it for me and Mike. Take it easy.